Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. It's nice to be sitting in the sidelines and be able to smirk and be snide on occasions. Poor Bill Bennett, he's totally embarrassed this morning over the Kinsella affair. Now, in case you don't understand it, who is Kinsella? Kinsella is a hotshot, Ontario's civil servant from the blue machine of Big Bill Davis, or he was. And he was brought out here to be the top man, the deputy minister with Bill Bennett, and he was touted as a ruthlessly efficient strategist. He knew exactly what to do in every set of circumstances. And we know that Bill is building his machine for an election sometime next year. And what does Kinsella do? Oh, first of all, Kinsella replaced the imperturbable, totally cool, absolutely proper, perfect prototype civil servant, Laurie Wallace. So Kinsella takes his place. And what does Kinsella do? First time out of the starting gate in public, he puts his big blue machine foot into his mouth, and he'll find it very difficult ever to get it out. Simple little scene. Charlie Barber, who is one of the backbench NDPs in Victoria, and the most elegant, cool, quiet, gracious gentleman, was debating with McGeer in the House. And suddenly, from somewhere comes a voice, "Why don't you shut up? Why don't you shut up?" McGeer didn't interrupt you when you were talking. And this turned out to be Pat Kinsella. What did Bennett have to do? Bennett had to call him in, apologize to the House, the matters before the Speaker. And I feel kind of sorry for Kinsella in some ways. But, you know, it's like judges who should not interfere in politics. Civil servants must not interfere in a debate in the House, because they are supposed to be placidly non-partisan on all these occasions. Well, poor Mr. Kinsella was tackled by my colleagues in BCTV News in Victoria yesterday, and he handled his unhappy situation really quite well. But here's precisely what happened when Kinsella had to make his amends.
I told Mr. Barber, as I say to you, that I'm writing a letter to the Speaker, and I'm going to apologize to the Speaker and to the legislature. I certainly regret the incident. I never thought that it was that big a deal, if you will. I simply...
Does that indicate possibly a lack of knowledge on your part of what goes on in the House?
No, I don't think so.
Does that kind of thing happen commonly in Ontario, where deputy ministers sit on the floor and interject while members are speaking?
No, it does not.
So why did you think that it was no problem, something that was an insignificant event in your mind?
I don't think I said that. I simply said that it was an impulsive thing that I said, and I have since apologized for it.
It's nice to know that people in high places can make the odd boo-boo. But not to rub it in, but on the telephone is Charlie Barber himself. Charlie,
Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. Were you terribly perturbed when you heard this voice shouting at you, "Why don't you shut up"?
I was really amazed, and my first reaction was to turn around and see who it was. I didn't recognize who it was, and in fact didn't find out for sure until yesterday morning, when I consulted the seating plan provided me by the Speaker's office and discovered to my amazement that it wasn't just a sort of general member of the public who thought that that was okay, but it actually turned out to be the senior advisor and deputy minister in the office of the Premier himself. I was really quite surprised by that.
Are you going to drop it, Charlie?
Well, I can't actually, in this sense. Yesterday I rose on a matter of privilege to ask the Speaker's advice as to whether or not an interruption by a person who happened to be a deputy minister, advising an MLA to shut up, to listen to someone else, to recognize that the matter I was raising was in fact covered in the throne speech, and if only I would listen to McGeer, I would get the straight goods. That was the gist of Mr. Kinsella's argument. that for a deputy minister, of all people, to do that might in fact constitute a contempt according to the rules of the House, and in particular to the citation that I offered from Sir Erskine May in the 19th edition.
Hey, do you want to have his scalp?
Not anymore, not in any personal sense at all. He's apologized, and I appreciate that, and I accept that. There is another issue, though, Jack.
What's
and
the
it's
other
an important
issue?
one. That's the issue of precedent. If it is understood that people on the floor of the House, especially deputy ministers, could in any sense get away with telling an MLA what to say and when to say it, that's a very bad precedent to establish. And at the very least, I hope that the ruling the Speaker brings down, which is in process, although it need not even name Mr. Kinsella, because, again, he's apologized, and I'm happy to accept that, and he apologized in a very gracious way. The ruling itself should establish a better precedent, especially for senior public servants, to make sure that they understand that their role in the House is not to tell MLAs what to do. That's the role of the general public at election time and in between elections. It's certainly not the role of...
One last question, Charlie. Is he the first of Bennett's new machine to drop in the kind of glue? No, he's not.
He's not the first.
Whatever became of Doug Hill, the great new communications deputy minister? He's now keeping a very low profile. What was the thing that embarrassed him?
Oh, it was more than one thing. The very first episode was shortly after he was appointed to this allegedly nonpartisan post of his. He ended up going to a private meeting of the Social Credit Party at the Harrison Hot Springs Hotel, where he was evidently giving advice as to how they could put their political case better.
They never learn. And then he brought up the Sedaways or somebody to do some film.
Yes, that's right. He brought up a couple of folks from Hollywood who apparently were going to help the government do what the government wants to do, and then it was discovered he had a significant budget increase and was taking over the television operations of the Department of Health, and on and on and on it went, and it just got worse and worse, and
So that's it.
became more and more untenable.
Okay, so Patrick Kinsella opened his big mouth, put his foot in it.
Sure did.
Hill was indelicate. How about this other fella, Spector? Is he still got a low profile?
Yes, he has. I don't think people hear about him much at all anymore.
He's
Nor,
an-
in fact, have we heard about Mr. Heel for some time. It's fairly clear from what we can tell that, at least as far as the government's concerned, Mr. Heel has been more or less put out to pasture.
Okay, Charlie. Thank you very much. I'm glad you got your apologies. If and when you're ever back in government, I'm quite sure your people will make the same kind of boo-boo in due course.
We've been known to do it.
Thank you, Charlie Barber.
Bye-bye.
Much obliged, Charlie. In the office this morning is the man who is erecting the tombstone, the permanent tombstone, on the multiple unit residential building plan, which unions and free enterprises alike say has been the only way to give us the thrust for rental accommodation. And that is that happy man, that faithfully dedicated Liberal Cabinet Minister for Housing, Paul Cosgrove. Say nothing yet, Paul. And then, just for a change, although, you know, politicians, some of them do become a drag, are two Tories. Bill Kempling, who is the whip. He's the sadist for the Tory party. He's the man who's got to whip them occasionally, except Fridays, of course, and Mondays into the House of Commons. And acting as his ADC is the ebullient Chuck Cook. What else have we got this morning? Oh, a couple of other things. And I'm telling you, if the phones don't work this morning, you may well see me commit harry-carry live on television. And that's almost a promise. If it's not on me, it may be on somebody else. But first, for Cosgrove, Paul Cosgrove, the Right Honourable Minister of Housing, give him his title and his respect after the break. Paul Cosgrove is Minister of Housing in the Liberal government in Ottawa. I want to get this quite clear, because you know the panic there was on the coast here when you brought down your budget and you effectively killed MURBs retroactively, and then your government did a flip-flop for this year. Correct, sir?
I qualified in one way, Jack. It was soft cost of MURBs, so it was a partial MURB that stopped on the 12th. They were reintroduced. MURBs continue and have always been going to continue in large part until the end of the year.
We need a word of explanation. Of course, MURBs have been a manner of building rental units which gave considerable tax advantages to those high-income earners who could hide soft costs and deduct them from their personal income, right?
That's correct.
Very successful scheme.
That's correct.
Very successful.
Finance Minister says that MURBs will not continue. He has given the Housing Minister, me, a budget of $350 million over the next 2 years to provide a substitute for the housing that was created by MURBs. I believe that program will work, and there won't be fewer shelters, fewer rental accommodation units built in British Columbia this year, next year. There will be more. So there's a substitute. What will be missing is, as you've indicated, the tax advantage to those people in the higher income brackets that used it as a way of sheltering some of their income.
One thing I don't concede. When you kill MURBs, as you are now killing them for the totally foreseeable future, it will result, will it not, in an absolute nosedive of thousands and thousands of units in Western Canada, especially British Columbia and Alberta.
No, Jack, I disagree with you.
How can you
What
replace
I've
it?
said to you is we have a program that will provide incentive in a different way through a $7,500 interest-free loan up front that will encourage the start or the substitute of multiple buildings instead of what was produced under MURBs.
What you're doing, MURBs were such a great advantage that they could claim and they could prove that with the tax advantages and write-off in MURBs, it halved the rental cost to $600 instead of, without MURBs, $1,200, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. So that was a big advantage to renters, builders, and investors.
Yes.
That's gone.
My main concern, no, it isn't all gone, Jack. My main concern is that people, number one, find accommodation that they need. We need rental accommodation in British Columbia. That rental accommodation will be built. It will be available. 1/3 of the units that will be started on the rental stimulus program that I've talked about will be assisted under a rent geared to income, which means that people will continue to be able to find affordable accommodation, rental accommodation, and that will continue. What will be missing from the piece, as you've indicated, is the tax shelter to a few Canadians, to too few Canadians who are able to take advantage of the tax system to their benefit. Finance Minister, in turn, will take those savings and translate them into the reduction in taxes paid by lower income people, and I think I've shown you figures that people in the 20,000 range will pay 52% of taxes next year as a result of the transfer of those shelter provisions to lower income families.
Well, I dare say when you said that to real estate people yesterday, you were hissed.
That's correct.
Bound to be hissed.
That's right.
And you will admit that your flip-flop was essential because of the incredible pressure from British Columbia on places that were going to become ghost developments.
The flip-flop was necessary. I agree that the soft costs, if they had been terminated, would have done just exactly what was happening. That was closing the shop down. They were reintroduced.
Okay, now, so I don't have them in my back. Just let me ask you another question on that. The present tax loopholes for the builders, they say incentives, and for the investors, close as of the end of construction of units which start by December 31st this year.
That's correct.
Right. After that, no more MURBs.
That's correct.
That's a firm government policy decision.
That's the decision of the Minister of Finance.
You won't
I support it.
You won't slip it in the middle of next summer if you suddenly find that we've only got 0.04 vacancy rate now, up from 0.01. Now, if we go to worse than that or stay the same and people keep flocking to the West Coast, I'll give you dollars to donuts, you come back to MURBs.
Jack, my objective is to see that there's adequate rental accommodation or accommodation that is affordable to people. We have two ways of doing it. This rental program, the stimulus program, the $350 million will pay for. In addition to that, we have what we call co-ops, non-profit. In British Columbia last year, there were roughly 4,000 units provided of that kind of accommodation. Those units serve people who are looking for rental or who are not going to buy homes. What I'm saying is that next year I think there will be more rental accommodation. If there isn't, I'll look for ways of ensuring that it is.
You know, Pat,
I would rather go back to Section 56.1, co-ops and non-profits, rather than the MURB provision. But if, as you give the worst scenario, the disaster scenario, we had to look at it again, I would have to look at it carefully. But at the present time, I think that housing is going to be up in British Columbia next year, and you're not going to need MURBs.
So, no expert, Webster said he, but I want to make a bet with you right now. And the bet is what? What'll the bet? Something modest, something non-alcoholic.
Well, let's say a supper.
Dinner.
A dinner.
That by...
You have to come to Ottawa for it.
Oh. Well, I'm not buying your ticket here, and you're not buying my ticket there.
All right.
We'll meet in Winnipeg. I'll bet you that by the 15th of June, you have reintroduced MURBs.
That's a bet.
One fancy dinner for four.
That's a bet.
Mr. and Mrs., Mr. and Mrs.
That's a bet.
For four.
That's a bet.
Because, you know, I think you're far too tough. Co-ops take years to organize, get the land, problems with the city, problems with the government, problems with you. Co-ops, you give a man a MURB and the thing is up in 6 months.
Jack, you're wrong on all of them. Co-ops are ready to go. They're an efficient delivery system. They don't have any trouble. They work better with the city. They work better with me. And they are, in effect, the private sector doing what it does best, building housing.
Did I get an indication there that you're going to go back to this kind of rental means test in some of your programs? Is that for co-ops?
No, that's for the rental program, the $15,000, which will be assisted by the $7,500 interest-free loan.
Oh, and of course,
1/3 of those, 5,000 of those, will be further assisted. It first of all will be affordable housing. In addition to that, 1/3 will be assisted because those people in there will go in under a rent geared to income, a test, yes.
An income test.
Yes.
I mean, you've got to have the income test now and again. But 15,000 for the whole country, we'll get 1,500. 10%, 1,500.
No, next year, I said last evening, next year British Columbia will have over 5,000 assisted units, that is accommodation designed to serve rental needs. That I think is a very good leg up on the needs of British Columbia. And I wish that other people, such as the province, the government of the province, the Minister of Housing, Mr. Chabot, we'll see in a few minutes from now, would throw something on the table to match what the federal government is doing.
But he has done, sir. He's brought out of his budget the magnificent sum of $6 million to help housing starts in BC, plus some increases in second mortgages, plus encouragement on loans at 14% or something to build suites and houses. Is that not brilliant?
That's not enough, Jack. When you consider what the percentage of the $350 million will be directed towards people and their housing needs in British Columbia, when you look at the costs that taxpayers in Canada are paying to subsidize housing in this province and other provinces, that contribution of $6 million is insufficient.
Peanuts, isn't it?
It's small.
Yeah. Cosgrove says Chabot's dealing in peanuts. You don't really. I'm just, in case he's watching, I just want to get you annoyed
Jack.
with each other.
Thanks, Jack.
The other point is that Chabot said something that he wants to give tax incentives, MURB style, to people in BC. He can't do that, can he?
He can do it. He can do what he wants. What I'd like him to do is put more resources in some way or other to match the federal government's initiative in bringing rental accommodation.
Okay. Not going to talk about the budget too much, except for your mortgage help. You're an expert on the mortgage help.
Yes, I am.
Principally in the budget, you're lucky that interest rates are dropping, and we all hope they keep going down, right?
Yes.
But what you did principally in the budget is merely guarantee that the banks wouldn't lose money where hard-pressed homeowners have to capitalize their debt.
No, it was a two-pronged
Oh,
plan,
forget
sir.
the other one. Forget.
No, please don't, because I know from people who've been after me since the last time I was on your show,
that's right.
people who really felt they would lose their homes, who had no equity in their home, who couldn't take advantage of the income deferral, will be assisted by the government to the tune of $3,000, and that will save some Canadians their homes. That's what I said we would do. That's what the government said it would do when it went into office, and that's what we put in the budget.
But you haven't got much for that. You've got 12,000 homes, was it?
No, we say that there's a group of 50,000,
50,000.
potential group of 50,000 candidates for that assistance, and of the $350 million, there's sufficient money to protect those houses.
Is there an income test for those who want that 3,000?
No, there isn't, Jack. No, there isn't.
You mean if I've overextended myself, my wife and I, we've gone crazy, and I've got a mortgage of $250,000, I can still get 3,000 back from you?
That's correct.
More with Paul Cosgrove and your calls. Let's get at the calls after the break. You must have been quite impressed with the tens of thousands, I won't argue about the number, who turned up in the mortgage protest in Ottawa. They were still unhappy with the fact that you gave no direct aid. How does the other half of your mortgage aid work? Is it merely not a guarantee to the banks, as I said, to make sure they don't lose money on the homeowners' deficit financing?
That's correct, Jack. Before we had the group, the CLC brought the group to Parliament recently, we've had other trips to Parliament, convoys of anger. I've had some pretty rough debates. I've had a couple of rough months talking to Canadians about housing. And we had designed a plan that would encourage the banks to offer through the mortgage holders, whether it's the banks, the trust companies, or the credit unions, to offer a plan that permits people to pay the same amount this year as they did last year, but to add the increased interest on the capital of the mortgage down the line. Some banks, some trust companies wouldn't even do that. We had to provide a guarantee that if they did it, any losses incurred would be paid for by the federal government.
Yeah, the Prime Minister rejected my suggestion that there should be an arbitrary reduction to a certain level for first-time house buyers of, say, $150,000 maximum. Not practical, he tells me.
Well, there's a question of equity involved there, and I'd invite you to discuss with Mr. McKechnie. That's finance. I'd rather talk about housing.
Yeah, just one broad thing, though, as a member of the Cabinet. You must concede that this budget makes it quite clear that the Liberals, full of equity and decency and fairness, are moving to the left. You're certainly not going to the right because you've slapped the free enterprisers in the teeth.
That's one way of describing it, Jack. Another way is to describe what we said when we started out, that in tough economic times we'd look after the small person, and that's what we're doing, is looking after the small person.
More to the left than you were.
That's left. Sure, that's left.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Cosgrove. My name is Gail Smith, and we are losing our home. We are in foreclosure. Our house has gone to the courts, and around about the 8th of March or so, we are going to be sitting out in the street. My husband is very ill.
Gail.
We have no money, no place to go, and Jack Webster can fill you in on the details. I've written you
Just a moment, Gail, just a moment, Gail.
I've done everything, and I can't seem to get any answers as to where or how we can get some help.
Hold on. This is a terribly complex question, which I wouldn't ask you to tackle. A little house, big mortgages, refinanced it unwisely, covering other debts and whatnot. And I don't think I want to get you involved in that. If she has written to you, and I'm sure you'll look at it.
Thanks, Jack.
Too complicated. I want the broad questions of the people who are easier to understand. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. First of all, regarding your bet with Mr. Cosgrove, I agree that they should bring the MURBs back, and I don't think they make any sense that they cut them out. But I think you're going to lose your bet because they don't have a handle on what's going on in this country. Secondly, I'd like to ask Mr. Cosgrove what he intends to do to help the contractors put up apartment buildings to subsidize the financing on apartment buildings.
Yes, I've already indicated that's the second part of the design in the budget, which is the $7,500 interest-free grant. That $7,500 is an approximate amount. I'll be meeting with Mr. Chabot to see whether it's going to work in this market in British Columbia. We're committed to put in place a substitute plan that will assist the contractors, assist the developers in ensuring that 15,000 units are built across this country next year.
$7,500 will be applied to what, Mr. Cosgrove?
That would make it easier for the builder to put up a building, taking into account what he can charge for rent.
I'm afraid I have to spell that out. If a unit costs, we'll say $60,000 a unit, right?
Yes.
Well,
Just a minute. He'll borrow 52.5 at the going rates, and you'll give him an interest-free guarantee on $7,500. Is that
Second mortgage.
right?
That's
a second
correct.
mortgage.
Yes.
No interest.
No interest.
No interest. So, in other words, you reduce the financing of a 60,000 unit to 52,500 using rough figures.
Rough figures.
Are we talking about an apartment building now?
Yes, we're talking about apartment buildings for renters.
Well, this is the end user. The apartment renter will be subsidized $7,500.
No.
No.
The builder will get an interest-free $7,500 financing.
That's correct. In addition to that, I indicated that 1/3 of those 15,000 units would be further subsidized. That is, the user, the renter who uses them, would be able to go in under a rent-geared to income formula.
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Cosgrove, I would like to take you up on another bet and make you a bet, and I will buy your ticket back here and you buy mine back there, that if this scheme works, and I don't think it will, and I think you'll have to reintroduce the MURBs or do something else because $7,500 will not subsidize the contract.
It's not $7,500. It's the interest on $7,500.
I know that, and it still won't work.
Thank you, sir. Are we different from the rest of the country?
It's confusing, Jack.
No. I mean, our prices are higher, our interest rates are higher, our housing demands are heavier. Not interest rates. Our prices are land much higher than, say, where you come from.
Your markets are different, yes. Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge the minister's credibility in terms of the new scheme that he's proposed. Based on the unit value of $60,000 to $65,000, and I've worked out $65,000, If you look at that cost, you're looking at financing approximately $57,500. And at current interest rates, even assuming that they're 17% for a commercial venture, the $7,500 comes off. You're still looking at a 15% interest cost to the builder. When you average it out on the 57.5 at 17%,
that's
then
fair enough.
average the whole amount. The builders couldn't justify building at 12 and 13%. It wasn't a viable method then. I don't know how he expects this method to work now at 15% with a much higher interest rate.
Okay.
And finally, I'd like to say that with this new program, they're obviously implementing it to save money. So the program is less. I can't see how they're trying to sell it as being of same value as the MURB program. They're trying to save money.
Okay, hold on.
Jack, two things. In addition to the $7,500 interest-free loan, the provisions of the National Housing Act, which will be brought before Parliament in the next few weeks, are designed to permit Canada Mortgage and Housing to offer higher insurance and higher mortgage, which we were not permitted to do before. Before, we would only insure up to 55% of the value of the project. With those amendments to the Act, which I hope that the Conservatives members here today will assist in passing to assist the builders and the industry, that will make it easier for the industry to bridge the gap that the last gentleman just talked about.
More with Paul Cosgrove, Minister of Housing, after the break. Just to be quite fair to the Minister of Housing, Paul Cosgrove, MURBs have gone, we've gone through all that, but you must have been very impressed from the fact that I think it was something like between 8,000 and 9,000 units had stopped and been started again on the flop, right?
That was shocking, yes. That sent a shock wave to
Yeah, but $1 billion, between $500 million and $1 billion worth of construction. Now, you're replacing that with 15,000 units,
Correct.
rental assistance,
yes.
a builder, a subsidy assistance. Some will be co-ops. How many will be co-ops of that 15,000?
No. In addition to the 15,000, there are 25,000 across Canada of co-op and non-profit. So it's a total, Jack, nationally of 40,000, which is roughly 1 in 4 of all starts that we'll see next year.
Yeah, and when these apartment builds go up, or apartment buildings go up for rental by the contractors, 1/3 will be for people on income tests.
That's correct.
And 5% will be for handicap.
That's right, and they'll be in the markets where the provincial ministers, where the local councillors and mayors say that they need rental accommodation, not where the investor thought they should be built.
Go ahead from Mission to Paul Cosgrove.
Yes, Mr. Cosgrove, I would like to know why the government has not seemed to have held itself responsible to the assistance program for the AHOP, in which in the beginning the people buying were told that they would be able to pay back the assistance at 11 3/4, and at the end of the 5 years, all of a sudden it changes to 20 1/4.
Oh, perhaps you're unaware that the subsidies under the AHOP program, when they matured at the end of 5 years, 2 years ago, were extended. That was the first thing I did as Minister of Housing to ensure that the government met that commitment. It was extended again last year, and further in the budget and in my speech, you will see that the assistance of that mortgage renewal plan of an additional $3,000 was extended to MURBs. So in fact, not only have we met our commitment, but we've doubled the subsidy available to those people acquiring equity in AHOP homes. And contrary to what you said, that isn't a withdrawal, that's a doubling. So I'm not sure what you get.
You said MURB, you meant AHOP.
AHOP, I'm sorry. I'm
the
not
$3,000 cash grant is available to AHOP people still in trouble.
To AHOP, and that's double what it was available to them last year.
Go ahead to Paul Cosgrove.
Mr. Minister, my question is, wouldn't it be more of an economy to reinstitute the capital gains tax exemption rather than pouring $350 million into subsidized housing?
It was a question of priorities. The government decided that rather than give the tax break to a very few Canadians, we would rather give those tax break to a lot of Canadians who are earning lower income amounts. So, for example, people earning $20,000 next year will have a 52% reduction in their taxes paid. It was a decision based on equity. Well, who should the government support in hard times?
Fair enough, I suppose. Mind you, I'd hate to be a Liberal bagman in the province of British Columbia going to the entrepreneurs for contributions. You'll get every door in Vancouver slammed in your face.
Jack, the people who will build those 15,000 units across the country will be assisted and supported by the government. That's my commitment, and I'm a member of the Liberal Party.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Cosgrove, rather than subsidies, why does the federal government not insist on viable economic solutions? My concern is if the interest rates do fall, what will keep them down?
Well, the finance minister, of course, addressed that by, for example, trying to get the deficit down. A $3.2 billion reduction in the deficit next year over this year is an attempt by the government to bring interest rates down, inflation down, and as you say, to introduce health to the economy generally. I agree, that's the long-term objective of the government.
Thank you. From Prince George to Paul Cosgrove. Hello.
This is from Duncan.
I've taken the wrong call. Hold on, please. My first mistake this year. Go ahead from Prince George.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Cosgrove. I was wondering, when you go in, on the TV, they mentioned that the interest rates have gone down to 17%. So then you go into the bank to get a mortgage thinking that you're going to get a mortgage on your house for 17%. But then they tell you that the interest rates on 17%, that's for a demand loan. To get a mortgage, it's still 21.25%. Now that's very deceiving for people. And how come when the interest rates go down on those, the banks don't put the interest rate down on a mortgage that quickly, and yet when the interest rate goes up, they're very quick to put the interest rate up?
Yeah, that's correct. I think earlier in the spring the banks were slow, but I think you'll find in the last month that some of the banks moved ahead of the drop of the bank rate. They reduced their mortgage interest rates before the bank rate was reduced.
And at least one or two lending institutions have said we're even going to backdate it now that it's dropped and you only signed it a month ago.
Jack, I should mention that the mortgage renewal plan is backdated too. That plan goes back to September 1st, so if there's anybody who's renewed a mortgage since September 1st and feels they're paying a disproportionate amount, over 30% of their income towards paying for their mortgage, should go back and talk to their bank, the trust company, and take a look at that.
But we tried to get a mortgage, and that was just a week ago, and they told us it was still 21%, 21.75%.
Well, I would invite you to shop around.
Yeah, go to the credit union.
Okay,
thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Cosgrove. I sent
Good morning.
a letter to your department on November the 10th. I received a reply on November the 20th. I must compliment your department. They stated that my correspondence would be brought to your attention at the earliest opportunity. I'm a single parent, just as our Prime Minister is. I've been looking after two little girls for 2 years now, and with all of the frustrations, I've had to now take time off work, and I'm under doctor's care. Just a couple of days ago, my employer has given me termination notice. I'm looking at my mortgage being due on May 1982. Recently, the courts have awarded my ex-wife the amount of $20,000 to be paid in May of 1982 as her share of the equity.
So you got to sell a house.
The equity in the home right now is $20,000. I'm looking at, number one...
But sir, we can understand your rather troublesome family complications. What do you want Mr. Cosgrove to do about it?
Perhaps after the program, he could take my name and number off the air as a reminder of the letter, and hopefully, with my faith still in the system in Canada, somebody out there could offer some assistance.
Well, don't forget that you can't blame the minister, the Liberal, the Tories, or Webster for your personal problems.
Oh, I understand that.
I mean, things happen and you got to cope with them and you got to survive. They're more difficult sometimes than others, but we certainly will take your number and give it to Mr. Cosgrove's executive assistant. Go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Ann Watson. I spoke to Mr. Cosgrove last time he was on. I have 3 more things to discuss with him. I was wondering, first of all, if he could have any comment about last night's article in The Sun, in the first page of the business section, entitled High Rates Help Push 3 Banks to Record Profits, and why, when I just turned the television on, he was making some comment as to the interest deferment plan keeping the banks in their profits. I just...
Oh, he didn't say that. You didn't say that this morning.
I don't recall.
What is your question, ma'am? Sure, the high interest rates make banks lots of money. That's why they have obscene profits. Webster speaking.
Yes, okay.
What's your question?
The other thing is he going to make any provision for us to renew? We renewed our mortgage on the 1st of October at 22%. Is there any provision for me to go back to the bank now that the rates are lower?
He just said that. Would you give that again,
Yes,
Mr. Cosgrove?
if you are paying more than 30% of your income towards your shelter costs, which we think is a rule of thumb in the industry, if you're paying more than that, the government said that they are offering a plan, and you could go back and investigate whether you fall into that plan and whether you will receive any help. It would be possibly an interest deferral. It could possibly be a grant. I'd invite you to speak to your banker or your mortgage holder or to your local CMHC representative.
So your program is 15,000 rental units across the country. Builders helped a little bit. Certain low-income people helped a little bit. Guarantees from the bank on the mortgages. Co-op building.
And a fairer tax system for most Canadians.
Can I say it one word?
The tax system will work for most Canadians.
talking
Jack,
about
the other
housing.
things I'm going to do my very best to see work.
And if you accept the disaster scenario, it's not impossible that you might, with your colleagues, if there's no housing in British Columbia, have a second look at MURBs in the middle of next year and lose a dinner bet with me.
Yes, that's a possibility, but I'll look at 56-1 nonprofits and co-ops first.
My thanks to Paul Cosgrove. You know, there are some Tories alive and around the country, one I haven't met before, and then an old-timer from here to try and whip up our interest in their party. Not easy. After the break. Well, the Prime Minister told the Liberals the other night that he doesn't really like them. And I think I've got an emissary here from Ontario called Bill Kempling. Are you here to tell us you don't like us?
Not at all. I have two sons, a daughter and a granddaughter out here. I feel as if I'm part of British Columbia, so I certainly like you.
Where's your seat?
Burlington, Ontario, next to Hamilton.
Bring any sample carpets?
No, we don't have carpets there, but we make a lot of steel close by.
I see. And you're the whip in the house?
I'm the whip in the house, that's right.
The attendance in the house is abysmal, isn't it, on Fridays?
On Fridays, yes, it is bad because members travel back to their constituencies in most cases, and we arrange House business in such a way that we normally don't have controversial legislation on Fridays. We have legislation where there's been some prearranged agreement that it will pass, and so we use Fridays for that sort of
We don't hear much from the Tories these days, do we, Mr. Kempling?
You don't? I thought we were pretty vocal in the House.
Oh, you can elect members out here, but you don't seem to grab the spotlight at all, do you?
Well, it's very difficult.
What do you think? What do you think of Trudeau and his boys? What's the bluntest you would say about them?
I mean, personally, or
well, not personally.
Well,
we can't use that kind of
no,
language
we
on
can't.
the air.
I know we can't.
But you tell me, you're an old Toronto Tory, right?
I'm an old Burlington Tory.
Ontario Tory.
Ontario Tory.
One of the blue machine.
Well, all right, I might be one of the back wheels, yeah.
Yeah, well, tell these people here, you know, what you Ontario Tories really think of the Liberals.
Well, we're very disappointed that, particularly in the budget, they had an opportunity to address many of the problems in the economy, and they just didn't do it.
And you got annoyed at them soaking the rich, didn't you?
Oh, we get annoyed at them soaking everybody. It's not the rich, it's the middle class that are being oblitterated in this country.
And if Joe Clark were elected, you'd put back all the incentives and loopholes and investment interest write-offs, wouldn't you?
We're dealing with labels, Jack. Yesterday's incentive is today's loophole. Those incentives were put there for reasons, and I'm sure that if we were in power that we believe in incentives, in industry and in moving the public towards certain objectives. We believe in incentives, so we would put incentives back in definitely.
For sure.
What they would be, I can't say.
What's the attendance on a bad Friday? 265 members of the House of
No,
Commons?
on a bad Friday you'll have maybe 100 members in the House out of 284.
Oh, it's 284 now. Yeah. Never see Cook on a Friday, do you?
Oh, he's there quite often, depending on what's going on out here. He has responsibilities.
Oh, I forgot. Are you one of the people who want to dump Joe?
No,
You like Joe?
I think he's the greatest thing we've ever had. I really do.
No reservations at all?
No reservations whatsoever.
You're the first Tory I've met without
I'm here to tell you, he'll be the leader in the next election of our party, and he'll be the Prime Minister of Canada.
He's got reservations about Joe.
Well, I don't have any.
Haven't you?
Reservations in only one sense, Jack, is for the Conservative Party at this point in time to get involved in a leadership contest would be utterly ridiculous.
Carry.
Our problem is the Liberal government and the stupid things they're doing to the country. So let's not muck around even thinking about leadership at this time, for the simple reason is there are far too many important issues in this country that have to be fought out in the House of Commons and have to be fought out with the government of the day.
Thank goodness we've got the constitutional package last Quebec, and even although I don't like the Charter of Rights, thank goodness it's apparently over and done with, isn't it?
Well,
Just about,
relatively.
just about.
Just about.
Yeah.
When will it pass the House?
Probably next week.
Probably
Next week.
I would think it would go out next week and into the Senate for a day and then on to Britain and probably back shortly after.
Okay, in what way have they slapped BC in the teeth recently in the House of Commons, apart from the MURBs? They don't understand the MURBs, do they?
No, they don't understand the housing crisis out here. Paul Cosgrove, personally, is a nice guy. I'm rather fond of him. But darn it, he talks about 15,000 units for Canada across the country. We need something like 30,000 rental units in the Lower Mainland alone in order to relieve the crisis we've got here. You can't tell them back east. They just don't understand. You know, I've always said that the Rocky Mountains, of course, were much more than a geographic barrier for BC, but it works both ways. They don't understand what we're thinking out here. We go back there, I fight with Kempling, I fight with the Ontario members.
Why don't you like Kempling?
Well, because he's from Ontario, and these ruddy people from Ontario don't understand the West.
That's petty bigotry and racism.
Like the devil it is.
Sure it is.
No, it's not, Jack, not at all. It's a question of being an emissary from British Columbia to try and make them understand in Eastern Canada what's going on out here, what our problems are, because some of them are much more intense than they have in Ontario. But it's pretty tough to get through their thick skulls, frankly, with the greatest respect, Mr. Webb.
I must say, Trudeau certainly seemed to hit a good point the other night when he said, what do you want? You want a country? Or do you want 10 provinces run by potentates?
I don't want a country
He has
that's
a point
run.
there.
Like the devil, he's got a point. I don't want a country that's run by 75 seats out of Quebec and 95 seats out of Ontario. I want a country where we've got some input into the decision-making process. All the provinces should have that input, and they don't at the moment, Jack.
You can never have a balance if you have representation by population. You can't outweigh that balance, practically speaking, can you?
The Americans solve that problem with a matter of genius, and that's through their Senate, where they have the state of Rhode Island has 2 senators, the state of California has 2 senators. Rhode Island feels they're part of the decision-making process.
One of the big problems, though, in this country, Jack, is that when Mr. Trudeau came to power, he changed the rules in the House of Commons by closure. And the change of the rules took away the ability of members of Parliament to have control over the spending of the government. And you know, when you squeeze the purse, that's where you have the control. And for instance, we're going to be passing shortly probably something in the order of $54 billion of government spending. That will pass in a matter of an hour and a half in the House of Commons. And
after the committee work?
Well, after the committee work. But let me tell you, the rules of the House say that amount will pass by a certain date or it will be deemed to have been passed. In other words, if we didn't pass it, if we stalled it and filibustered it at committee, then it doesn't mean anything because it's going to pass anyway, whether you like it or not.
When Joe Clark took office, did he not change the rules?
When Joe Clark took office, no, we didn't change the rules. We said, just a minute, he said we were going to bring in a Reform of Parliament Act that would address that. And of course, we weren't there long enough in order to do that.
He did promise to do that.
Oh yes, that was one of our.
And as of now, when you've got a time limit on a budget bill, that even if you attempt to carry it on, the $54 billion is deemed to be approved.
It's deemed to have been passed, and that's all there is to it. And when you take that control away from members of the House of Commons, then they have no control at all over the conduct of the government.
Except, you know, people don't want the House to go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
No, but look, in the past, prior to 1968, they had different rules, and in the past, a minister bringing in his estimates, his prime job was to get those estimates through the House of Commons. And if he found that there was some measure in his estimates that was being objected to by the House, then he would modify it or change it. And you had a better balance of democracy.
Arbitrary financial dictatorship by these ruthless liberals, right?
Absolutely.
After the break. You might want to talk to some Tories after the break. After the break. Forget the politics. If you want to talk to Cook and complain about his lack of attention to your particular problems, feel free.
Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate that.
But Mr. Kempling was telling me a couple of funny stories about, what would you call it, bomb mowers in the House of Commons. Tell me one about Sven Robertson.
Well, Sven is a nice young chap, but he was speaking in the House the other day, and he rose and asked the Speaker when we were going to have decent rape laws in this country. And that struck me rather funny, and I said to him after, I said, do you realize what you said? And I thought perhaps he'd go to Hansard and have it removed, but he didn't, and it's still there, and you'll probably find it in Reader's Digest or a magazine sometime down the road.
Oh, no, not anymore. That's a sexist, racist remark.
Oh, is it?
Oh, people will scream at us for laughing about it. You're not allowed to laugh anymore, you know. The other one you told me.
Well, this is before my time, but we had two members of the House of Commons, one Liberal, one Conservative. One had lost his right arm in the war, and the other one had lost his left arm in an industrial accident. And although they hated each other politically, they used to go down once a year in the winter, in the oncoming of the winter, and they'd buy a pair of gloves.
One for one and one for the other.
One for one and one for the other, you know.
Yeah,
But, a lot of funny things that happen in the House.
What about all this mess you're having right now, although you may not be involved in it, where they're nagging at you because you won't pick up your dishes in the cafeteria?
Well, that's just a little in-house problem. That only occurred when the members came back from their summer vacation and back into the House. Prior to that time, the dishes were picked up, and it was just a little action on the part of some of the staff of the members and others to say, well, they're trying to take away one of the services that
I mean, you can live really cheap in Ottawa, can't you, with all your subsidized services?
Like the delegate can.
What, no $2.95 steak dinners?
No way.
No, it's more than that now.
How much is it now, $3.95?
Yeah, $3.50.
$5 for steaks, and, you know. But that's not the point.
Well, I'm not nagging you. I just want to know.
It's the costs have gone up, and they have to be reflected in what they charge us. They try to operate it on a break-even basis, but they haven't been very successful. It's a very costly operation. But if you didn't have restaurants there, you'd have members spread all over the city, and when I want them for votes, I wouldn't be able to get them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons.
Were you the guy that called the Tories into the dreadful budget defeat?
No. Oh yes, I was the whip at the time. That's
okay. Right. For these people who have just recently begun to take an interest in politics, Joe Clark became Prime Minister of Canada. He brought in a brutally honest budget. He called principal vote in the House of Commons, knowing he was going to be defeated?
I don't think that the perception that he was going to be defeated was evident until probably the last few hours, probably the day. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's not generally known, and I can say it in British Columbia, is because Mr. Trudeau says nothing ever gets out to British Columbia or ever gets back. But one of the things that happened just before the vote was taken was that we were approached by a member of the Socred party, and he said this to us, standing out in front of the chamber, ready to come in to have the vote counted. He said, he held his hands up and rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, and he said, "Our support is a matter of the dollars." And Joe Clark turned on his heel.
If you had obtained these 5 Socred votes,
we still wouldn't have had it. We still would have been short a couple. It would have been down. If we'd had the 5 Socred votes, it would have been a tie vote, and it would have been up to the Speaker to make the decision. Now the Speaker would have probably voted with us because of the conventions of the House.
Yeah, he can't be partisan when he's casting a vote, can he?
But by the same token, it would have signaled some difficulties down the road for us, and would have made it very difficult for us down the road. So that's the way it happened. But we had a member in the South Pacific. We had Flora MacDonald in Paris. We tried to charter an aircraft to bring her back, and we couldn't get one to get her back here in time. And so we just
So the
had to
government
go.
went down, and you're responsible for the Liberal government.
Well, that's one way.
If you've got a crucial vote in the House, the House cannot be defeated except in a major, generally financial measure.
On a financial measure, that's right.
If you whistle in guys in a minor vote and defeat them, it doesn't mean anything, does it?
Well, it doesn't. It's not really a confidence measure. Although they would take it as a very serious matter. We've had them as close as 2 seats or two votes.
How long does it take you to whip the troops together?
Depends on where they are.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll agree. When a vote is called, I'll cross the floor and talk to the Chief Government Whip, Charlie Turner, and we determine how long the bell is going to ring as a rule.
15 minutes?
15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. If we can't agree, we say, okay, we'll meet in an hour and we'll have another chat. We had a vote recently where there were members in Montreal, there were members in Toronto, and they had to be flown back. These were government members. They were down opening factories, attending functions of one type and another. They had to be flown back, and we waited till they came back.
In other words, when a guy's on legitimate public duty, you'll give them time to bring them back.
Yes, as a rule.
And if I want to take a weekend off and I'm a Tory, and I'm a Liberal and he's a Tory, do I come to you and say, okay, we're going to be paired?
You come to me.
Come to you.
Come to me, and I will pair them if I can, depending on the temper of the House. If our boys are in a bad mood and Joe Clark says no pairs, then there's no pairs.
No pairs. Right?
And if the pressure eases off and the legislation before us is non-controversial, then we'll pair.
You've got to stop smoking.
I know.
So you're still smoking?
Yes, of course.
Silly, isn't it?
It's a foul, filthy, dirty habit, as you well know.
Let's go to the phones with these two old Tories. The Whip, Bill Kempling, and the nag, Chuck Cook. Whip the nag, see, joke, after the break.
Last 18 months is going to push that along. We're gaining tremendously in other parts of the country.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Cook.
Sir.
You were right about Liberals being quite ignorant toward Western markets, especially in the housing field. And Mr. Cosgrove, who was on earlier on the show, says the rule of thumb is that you are poor if you pay more than 30% of your gross debt ratio toward a mortgage. And I don't know what he's meaning by that, because there's a lot more people out here paying more than 30% for their mortgage because the house prices are going up the way they did.
But he doesn't do anything for you, does he?
The rates going up the way they did.
No, he just guarantees the banks. That's all.
One of the great mysteries that I find with this whole housing business was that in 1975 we passed in the House of Commons legislation that allowed the setting up of mortgage investment corporations and a mortgage bank. Now they've never proceeded with that, and I don't know why. And the purpose of the mortgage investment corporations was to allow these corporations to assemble portfolios of residential mortgages and sell them to the pension funds, because the pension funds at the time, they were having trouble with their profits and revenues. And if the pension fund wanted to turn that mortgage portfolio into cash, it came to the mortgage bank in Ottawa, they cashed it in, they circulated it back through the system again. For reasons that I'll never understand, we passed it in the House, we passed it in the Senate, liberal initiative. We passed it in the House, we passed it in the Senate. It's been all through and is sitting there in the hopper, and they've never proceeded with it. And here
I've got a 3% loan to help me purchase the house that I'm living in now.
Mm-hmm.
And the company I'm working for, thanks to them, gave me $35,000 at 3%, so that the wife and I could purchase the house.
You're lucky. Under the new budget, I think you'll find that you have an imputed interest rate of 19% on any of it left as of the 1st of January.
That's my biggest complaint now.
That's it. There will be, for sure. Gentlemen, Chuck, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jack.
You too, Mr. Kempling. Keep using the whip on the Liberals.
Thank you.
And yourselves. And you're having a drink at the Coach House tonight at what time?
8 p.m. at the Coach House Inn, across Second Narrows Bridge. Bill Kempling will tell you all his secrets at that time. Please come to the meeting.
It's your secrets I want to know. After the break.
Thanks, Jack.
I'm much more relaxed this morning because it would appear the phones are working in a first-class manner. I use the phones as a backup, a buttress, a help, and for your input. And occasionally, too, I use letters. And here's a letter about one of the top trade union leaders in British Columbia by the name of Jack Monroe. And this is the first letter. Hello, Jack. Dear Jack, I turned you off when you had that horrible Jack Monroe and his terrible language on your show. Furthermore, The nasty remarks he made about our Premier Bill Bennett were entirely uncalled for, and I hoped that you would cut him off. K. Monroe, Vancouver. I have lectured Jack on occasion on his propensity to be somewhat too graphically outspoken. Then there was a letter came which I liked and which has some truth in it. And it refers not only to Webster, who is beyond any criticism of any kind, but to the tiny perfect columnist Fotheringham. Dear political pundits, that dear refers to cost, not love. You two sound like a couple of political eunuchs sitting on the fence criticizing the actions of those with the integrity and courage to attempt to deal with their problems. I would suggest, and not respectfully, that you two did more damage to Canadian unity than Lévesque and Morin combined. There is no appropriate signing off phrase except regretfully yours. Any more on that? Just a minute, I want to get that right. Except regretfully yours for the deterioration of two once promising cub reporters whose careers I have followed for over 30 years, Frank Snowsall. Frank is a very fine man, a dedicated NDPer, was very prominent in the public life of this province, and I'm sorry that Fotheringham upset him, because I'm sure I didn't. Story about prison sentences. A letter about prison sentences from Lund, as a matter of fact. And it says, on October the 30th, 81, the province ran a story about a man who received 4 years for killing his young wife. I am appalled at the light sentences being handed out. Wrote to the judge who passed the sentence. Wrote to the Attorney General. Read the light sentence. Why don't you discuss this issue on your program instead of interviewing so many authors? You're truly in killing Lund. One reason I don't discuss specific sentences in some of these cases when they seem to be quite appallingly light, that I will agree, is that over many years I have discovered that unless you know the evidence that was given at the trial and have heard it yourself or have a good report on it, you're not in a position to judge, unless it's comparable things like a mailman stealing money and going to jail for 3 years, and a stock fraud promoter stealing 10 times the amount of money and going to jail for 60 days. That kind of thing you can jump on. When it comes to deaths, it's very difficult to make a judgment. Now, here's the letter I really shouldn't use this morning because I think the battle is over. Dear, it's about the phones. Dear Mr. Webster, I am a regular watcher of your program. For the most part, I find it very interesting and informative. Could you please take your phone and throw it out of the nearest window? It is very boring to watch you day after day having difficulty getting your calls through. Here's wishing you a more successful mechanical, electronic, telephonic future. Yours truly, B. Lissoguer. Was that how you would pronounce that name? Well, now, I've got a leftover from Scotland, which I've been saving for some friends of mine to come back from a trip. Because this is Lorna Simpson's brother. And this is when we're up in the northeast of Scotland at a farm called Kirawardy with Faye and Tommy Pendrich. And if you're not watching Lorna, it's your fault. Here's what I said to Faye and Tommy. Right? Go. Webster's Taste of Scotland wouldn't be complete without a look at a Scotch farm. And with me are old friends of mine, Faye and Tommy Pendrich. Pendrich. You say it.
Pendrich.
Pendrich. Where's that name from?
East Lothian.
East Lothian. And we're at the name of the farm, please.
Kerroweird.
Kerroweird Farm, just outside Inverness.
That's right.
Well, farmers are always moaning, Tommy. I understand, however, that British farming and agriculture is highly successful, very concentrated and very profitable. True or false?
Well, that's not strictly true, particularly in the dairying industry. Costs have gone up dramatically in the past year or two, and the prices we're getting for our milk is not keeping pace with these costs.
How many milking cows?
We have a total of 130.
And how much you get for that if it's intelligible to laymen? How much many peas per pound or whatever it is?
Well, it's peas per litre, and it varies from month to month, but last month we got 15.
Now, would a Canadian farmer do better?
Yes, I believe they're getting 19p a litre.
And what about your food costs here?
Well, a ton of cake costs about £138.
The Canadian farmers don't have to go through that caper because they can grow a lot of their own protein. But mind you, there's no better life than being a farmer's wife in Scotland, is there?
I don't know. I haven't tried any other.
Haven't tried any other. Bureaucracy. I've had people say in Scotland, oh, these farmers are pampered silly. They're subsidised half to death. Is that true or false, either one of you?
Well, we don't get any subsidies at all.
No subsidies on your production?
No.
As far as dairying is concerned, there are no subsidies. But we also have to pay a co-responsibility levy, which has come about by our joining the common market.
Oh, would I be wrong to call it a bit of a subsidy to the European farmers, or a holdback on your farming?
It's supposed to be a penalty for overproduction in Europe of milk, but we are not overproducing in this country. It's overproduction in Europe.
And you still pay the co-responsibility levy?
We still have to, although we are not self-supporting in dairy products.
Okay, straight question. Did you do better when Britain was out of the common market?
Well, that's a difficult one.
Because we've had inflation since, we joined the common market. I mean, I don't think you can blame everything on the common market.
No. How about the prices for you as a housewife?
Well, they've all gone up terribly in the last 10 years.
Terrifying, aren't they?
Yes.
One last question about the civil servants. Are they any good to you, or are you bureaucratized to death?
Very, very much so. And at the moment, with them being on strike, we can't get paid our grants that are due.
Money's due to you?
Money's due to us, and we're not getting it in.
Waiting for it for a year in one case,
well,
I do believe.
There have been long periods, yeah.
Forgot to ask you. These are Holsteins.
These are almost pure Holsteins. We've been grading up for the last 5 years now with Canadian Holstein blood. And all the semen we get is imported from Canada through CMEX.
So, Canadian Holsteins and a Scotch farm.
Right.
Where did they start originally? Holland?
I believe it was in Holland, yes.
Holland to America?
And they went out with the Dutch settlers, I believe, to America.
And here did you milk them?
Here we're bringing them back again.
Scotch cow's no good enough?
Well, we haven't such a thing as a Scotch dairy cow, apart from the Ayrshire. But the black and white is the Friesian, as you know.
Just get one last thing to say to you. You've got a lot of relatives in Canada, haven't you?
Yes. Actually, my husband's relative, really, it's Tommy's sister and family.
You mean Lorna Simpson?
That's right, yeah. She's my sister.
And Ernest Simpson?
Yes.
Is that so? Now, one last question. It's not so cold today, is it? give me the traditional answer. I'll do it again. Not so cold today.
Aye. Isn't it so cold or something like that, is it?
Well, I'll drink a wee bit of your fresh milk and then I'll go on my way. Nice to see you, Tommy. Nice to see you, Faith.
Nice to see you again, Jack.
Seems 100 years since we took the crew over to Scotland and do that stuff. It was actually the middle of last summer. However, it's not so cold today here either. Free for all between now and the end, after the break. Interesting week this week so far still. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Jack, there's one thing for sure, Trudeau and his Liberals will pass on. But one policy that will...
Can't hear him.
Can you hear me?
Okay, start again.
I say Trudeau and his Liberals will pass on.
Uh-huh.
But one policy that will affect Canada for the future is his immigration policy. And this is well described in Doug Collins' book, The Destruction of English Canada.
That's not the title of the book, but I remember it.
Well, the title of the book is Immigration.
That's right.
I'm just wondering, this is essentially the trilateralist policy, which involves one world government. What do you know of trilateralism, and is Trudeau a trilateralist?
I don't think so. I think one of his cabinet ministers was at one time. Bob Bonner was at one time.
That's right.
The trilateralism to me seems to be an informal coalition of influential big business throughout the world with right-wing political overtones. I do not regard it as a menace to democracy or society. There are people in this part of the world who regard it as some secret world government. I don't. I don't think that you can shut the doors on immigration altogether. But what we must watch in this country is the culture shock. You must do it a little more gradually. You must allow people to fit in. If you bring them, you've got to have the proper facilities and the training. You've got to watch you don't make our own social services crack down. But the Metcalf, Collins paranoia about trilateralism is overdone, because in the final analysis, the politicians pushed to the wall will follow the wishes of people. Kelowna, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
How are you?
Good.
Mr. Webster, I was interested in listening to your program this morning, your two gentlemen you had on. And I've traveled back and forth across this country for many years, and I don't particularly believe that there's that much difference between East and West in the thinking of people. We're all Canadians. It's true that of course, the Conservative Party are their own worst enemies.
No doubt about that at all. I think that the average guy in Quebec has the same worries as the average guy here.
Yeah.
His job, his security, his mortgage rates, and his pension. Kamloops, go ahead, please.
Jack, tell us, is the budget really affected your personal income? And if so, are you thinking about being an American, deserting us here, or what?
I wouldn't go to live in the United States if the budget had taken away 99 cents out of every dollar. Sure, it's affected me a little bit, but not being a gambler or a speculator, it doesn't affect me that much. And I'm quite
Going to
prepared.
pull something, maybe some of our hockey players are leaving Canada or anything
Oh,
like
big loss.
anything like that, eh?
The one form of immigration I would stop is smuggling hockey players across the border out of a so-called iron cutting country to give them $1 million contract in which up to now they've been able to fiddle their taxis. That's the only kind of racist I am, and I don't like this business of smuggling guys across the country as refugees so they can play for some two-bit hockey team. I'm with you on that, and I appreciate your call.
Pardon?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. I was trying to get you the other day, Jack, when you were on with Mr. Howe about the coal smoke, the coal dust that blows over everybody who has a house at Point Roberts and everybody living on the west coast of
Ma'am, we need the money. We need the money. The man to nag is Howe because he wants to mend and polish his public relations. After the break. Planning a program on vocational training spaces and manpower training spaces over which there is great controversy. Tomorrow morning we'll have a couple of Indian spokesmen in just to try and see briefly and succinctly how happy or how unhappy they are. I think it's probably a reasonable compromise for the moment, 9 a.m. precisely.